Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's October the 12th, 2020. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've worked in the past week and will work on the next week, and then discuss any open items we might have. I start with myself. And so, so I spent a bit of time, not too much, on the WASM stuff, and just to explain it, because I said it almost every week, but didn't explain what this is about. So the idea is that there are read-only codecs compiled to WASM. And the idea is that in order to be able to traverse IPLD structures, you of course need to know the codec. So you can, for example, even if you just want to sync blocks, you want to go through all the stuff and go through the links and then go to the next block and so on. But in order to do this, you need to understand the codec. And hopefully there will be thousands of different codecs, IPLD codecs, but you have to understand them. So the idea is that if you create at least a read-only codec and compile it to WASM, an implementation that doesn't support it natively could just use a WASM runtime and use that implementation to at least be able to traverse something. So it's kind of like, it could be seen as like a stepping stone if you want to have your traversal working, but then want to later on implement it natively. But as a stepping stone, you just use the WASM stuff, which is kind of like combined with the hope that WASM is really hopefully at one point everywhere, and you can just use it in your programming language. And this is combined with looking into stuff, and it's one of the most promising things in the WASM world, where you want to shuffle around types from your host language into the WASM runtime is interface types. They change the spec all the time and don't have an implementation. So they had an implementation, but they changed the spec.
Who's changing the spec? What was the spec for? The interface types.
The interface types, yes. And
that's
so
a Rust thing, or that's not a WASM thing, is it? That's a Rust thing.
It's a WASM thing. Oh, so it's a WASM thing on how to, generally spoken, to interact with boundaries between your host language and the WASM runtime itself. So you can kind of like expose strings on a higher level and stuff like this. And it's like, it was super complicated. It got just recently, so there's a PR open to make it simpler, and also based on other WASM proposals. So it's really like, it's really, really far down the road. So it's like, it's based on 3 other proposals that haven't an implementation yet. So yeah, long way to go. So we can't wait this long for this. So the idea is to just use some other transport. So for example, currently what the WASM bind gen is using, which is a tool for creating bindings from WASM to JavaScript, they just exchange it with a serialized JSON if you have objects, which is obviously not such a good idea, or like it's super error prone and not fast at all and so on. So we probably use something else. And then also Michael prototyped SimpleDAG. And I sadly didn't find the time for doing this properly today, but I don't want to wait till next week. So Eric actually brought up with the conversation with him that, like, how is this different from CBOR? And then I thought, oh yeah, it's actually quite similar. And also the changes I proposed. So what I did is, and I want to have it finished today, but I didn't, I've at least coded the encoder. So I used Michael's code and just make SimpleDAG using CBOR instead of SimpleDAG. And surprise, surprise, the code got even less. Yeah. So I only have the encoder yet, but like it's really a diff of like 5 lines. And instead of SimpleDAG, it spits out CBOR. So I'm working on this as a proof of concept to show that if you really use strict CBOR, like DAG CBOR in a really strict way, it's super easy to implement, which is kind of connected to what Rod did with his making the DAG CBOR spec stricter. So if you have this strictness, yeah, it's super simple.
There's still variances though in CBOR for like the length of collections and things like that, isn't there?
Basically, it's even simpler. So you have less code because you don't need variants, because like CBOR does its own version of variants, kind of. So it's really like, anyway, I will finish this.
Wouldn't that be more code to implement their own thing now?
No, like I would just finish it, and just basically it's really to see that like what are the differences, and like it's kind of mind blowing. And as I said, I hoped I had it for today, but I didn't finish. But yeah, it's super fun, and we'll see, and can use this as for further discussions. But what I think about doing is I will probably use this stricter DEX CBOR as a basis for the WASM exchange format. But we'll see. And what I also will do is, because I even got asked today on the Rust IPFS chat room about what's the deal with Rust multi-hash and the release and so on. So I want to really get the Rust multi-hash release out. I will make PRs for Rust CAD, libp2p, and libIPLD just to make sure it works. And if it works, then I do the release and then update the PRs. And to my surprise, libp2p was just using multi-hash just at a single place like a half a year ago, and now they use it in multiple places. So it's more work than I thought, but still, it should be straightforward, and I hope to get this done this week. That's all I have. Next on my list is Danielle.
Can't hear me? Yep, okay. Just double checking.
Oh no, you're really quiet. You're really quiet. You're getting picked up by like a mic that's somewhere far away or something.
Is it better now?
No.
Okay, I'll go later. Then I'm sorry.
There you go.
Just came in.
Just switched.
Yeah.
What? I didn't do anything.
Yep. Yeah, now it's fine.
Yeah,
that's perfect now.
What? Oh my
You
God.
are being hacked. Please stand
Bluetooth.
back.
It's Bluetooth.
You're getting Linux is what's happening. Like you're just
Nope.
This is what happens when you run Linux.
I literally moved the volume up a little bit and then back down. Anyway, if it's fine, I will just go. Sorry.
Yep.
So I was working on the Hamd ADL again, and I got the name wrong in the notes, but I'll fix that. So essentially, it kind of works now, but it has a ton of to-dos. It essentially only supports the basics with bytes as values, so I'm going to be working on fixing that. I also spoke to Eric a little bit about how we could extend the Node API a little bit to support deleting entries, because the basic Node interface is really only about reading stuff, such as lookup by string and so on. There's also a call tomorrow, which is going to be in 24 hours and 20 minutes, about some changes to the Hamd spec that we've been talking about for a while, such as, I think one of them was merged already, changing the hash algorithm from a string to an integer. But there are a bunch of others that we spoke about, but we didn't actually commit to doing. So hopefully in the call, we can actually file issues and get them done. And then lastly, I really want to get going on the Hamd compliance tests so that I can reuse those with Rod instead of copy pasting tests from JavaScript and just redoing work between the two of us. It doesn't have to start immediately, but I think the sooner I can help with that, the better long term. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks. Next on my list is Michael.
Give me a minute to find the doc. I lost it somehow.
Well, then we just move on with.
I gotta go back to the damn thing. I've got it. Okay. All right. Okay. I finished up the multi-format / block interface. So we've been talking about moving the IPLD block interface over for a while. In a lot of conversations with Gozala, we kind of realized that we could pare this down to something that was small enough that it could actually be a base type in multi-formats and not something higher level. There doesn't need to be a codec registry. There doesn't need to be all this other stuff. So we got that down to like a really clean, tiny interface now that I really like. And it's really kind of open for other people to build other implementations of it that are still totally compatible and compliant, and other utility libraries on top, which maybe the IPLD block interface just becomes. But after I got that in, with a lot of help from Gonzala, I've wanted to dog food it with something, and I had this little idea in my head for like a little key value store that's basically it's just sugar on top of HAMT. Like there's no fancy IPLD work other than just a HAMT, but it's kind of interesting to just explore this space of, well, what does it look like to just make sugar and pretty JavaScript APIs on top of creating a little key value store that's in a HAMT. And that actually turned out to be like a really cool little library that I'm really happy with. So one, the new block interface is quite nice. I do like it. It worked really well for this case. And also, like, this is something that we should probably just port to other languages, because without any new work beyond a HAMT. So once we have a HAMT working in a language, like we're good. once we have a HAMT, we can actually create a little database and start to think about like, okay, what would cool sugar look like in Go or in Rust for working with links, or for mutating a database. Like how do you want to expose that and what do you return and things like that. So there's a little library called DKV, Distributed Key Value Store, and it's just on IPFS. So you bring up an IPFS instance, you pass it in, and then you just have like a nice to work with key value store on top of IPFS. It's pretty sweet. And yeah, now I'm still sort of figuring out like what the IPLD block interface should be and if we need it or not. There's certainly some stuff that it used to do that we don't do anymore. There was a lot of lazy loading stuff. There was some safety stuff in there that we did for immutability. So I'll probably create some new interfaces in there. I just want to actually have these problems and really be dealing with them when I go to do that, and not kind of hypothesizing about what I might need to do. I was kind of impressed that I made it through the whole DKV library without really needing anything other than the base. So I think I'll probably go through and update some of DagDB, and there I'll probably find some cases where like I do want a little bit more utility on top of the base types, and that's what the IPLD block library will become. And that's all I got.
Thanks. Next is Eric.
So I'm going to break my recent trend and just talk about docs. In this last week, we had a good number of us here on this call, a new meeting to try to synchronously push through some more docs and spec stuff. And that's probably just a ball that we're going to start to get rolling slowly, but I hope more so in the future. Most of what I'm going to try to do in the coming week is do more work on enumerating documentation that we know we need, because there is plenty of it, and then figure out how we're going to track that together. Probably just starting with more GitHub issues, but it seems like maybe we're going to need some tagging mechanisms to break these things down more. I don't know. We'll see. This week, I'm also working on a more full roundup of all of the things we've talked about in the area of string specifications. We've had a lot of discussions to date about string specifications and all of the possibly entangled components. It touches on everything from how we talk about the definition of maps to, of course, the basics of like where values actually appear in leaf nodes of large blocks of data, to how we path over things, and just generally what our interfaces look and feel like in various languages and what our range of features supported is. So it's a really big, hairy problem. And I'm finding that I've published exploration reports as GISTs. I just found one that was published in like June, and it actually has content dated from like the third month of the year. This has been a really long rolling discussion. So hopefully some more documents will come out soon and they can lead us towards a resolution. I hope. We'll see. That's my week.
Thanks. Next one is Rod.
Okay. So last week was fairly light for me. There was some holiday stuff in there. But what have I got? Okay, so I did a little bit more on the Go DAG PB stuff. This is partly an exercise in using what's in my head about DAG PB while I have it for the Go stuff, and partly additional familiarization work with IPLD Prime, just to make sure I'm, at least attempting to keep up with the stuff that's going on. And this is the how do you write a codec in IPLD Prime is quite an interesting exercise for me, at least anyway. So that's been educational, and there's stuff about with DAG-PB not being like DAG-CBOR and DAG-JSON, which are these codecs that can support the whole data model, and so they can instantiate nodes of all the different types. DAG-PB supports a particular shape, so essentially you have to instantiate into a schema-driven set of nodes, and the other way in as well. You have to only accept that type of data. So just learning about how to transform into the schema-driven stuff and back again, and use that for validation rather than writing all the validation again, because it's already in the schema. It's already in the schema gen code. And so my first attempt started writing all these validation rules, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, this is all done. I don't want to rewrite this stuff. This is done by the code gen. So I was pointed in the right direction on that, I think. I did some weekend hacking on my CBOR handling library. Michael pointed out to me last week that Ghazala is going to be soon, he's volunteered to replace the IPLD stack in IPFS with our new stuff. And so there's an opportunity there, a little window of opportunity to get in our as much of our new pieces that we want. And one of the pieces is the CBOR, which the more I dig into our CBOR handling, the more dark corners I uncover, as I shared yesterday in Slack, with all these superpowers that our JavaScript CBOR library has that it really shouldn't do. And so I just was tinkering that on the weekend, and I'm actually really close to just being able to drop into our DAG CBOR library. So I've just got to do a little bit of cleanup work around the handling of the final byte chunks of encoded forms. But in terms of its handling of all the CBOR we care about, the basics are all there. I just need to go back and deal with some of the strictness stuff that we've been agreeing on. So that's actually in a good place, which is good. And I don't really know what the priority level for that is, but I imagine Ghazala is getting itchy to start pulling apart IPFS and putting this new stuff in. So
actually had a call. So today in the core implementations group, Ghazala wasn't there, but Alex was there, and Alex said that he does want to move to the new stuff, but he wants some help. And I said, like, yeah, like Ghazala wants to do it too. We should all just have a call. So I think I'll probably pitch in a little bit too, but it'll be like kind of a group effort with Ghazala and myself and Alex.
Right. Well, that will already pull in the new DAG-PB stuff, which is nice. So it'll be, to give that some real world exercising would be really good, because I'm doing the same stuff in Go, and it would be nice to uncover problems sooner than later with real world data, because there's just so much potential for edge cases out there that would be nice to find. So I had a discussion with, there's been some pull requests coming in on some of the Go libraries that overlap with our work, and they're just going unanswered. And this is mainly due to the fact that the Go IPFS team has been shrunk to like 1 or 2 people, and leadership is no longer there. Like the original leadership is no longer there. So these pull requests, like getting the DAG Jose codec into Go CID, there's crickets. So I just had a conversation with the Go folks about that, about ownership. And what I really wanted was for Adin to step up and say, yeah, I'll just take over this stuff. But he's, obviously doesn't really want to. But where we landed was he identified 5 libraries that he thought were clearly IPLD. I don't really want us to take full responsibility for these things, because we're trying to move to a new stack, and obviously Eric doesn't want to care about them either. But I also don't want to see these things go stale for open source contributors, because there's nothing worse than showing up with lots of work and not getting anything done, not getting any responses. So I suggested that we could take on some basic OpenSource maintenance work, at least responding to PRs, maybe doing some basic things like maybe switching to GitHub Actions for some of these things, because right now there's a pull request. I literally technically cannot merge, even though I have commit access, because the repo rules stop it from merging unless all of the checks have been passed, and one of them is the code cov check, which is failing for some unknown reason that nobody can fix without like super.
You just rerun it a few times and eventually it'll.
Yeah, so I can't, because I've tried rerun and it doesn't do anything, and then I go to the details page and it says you don't have access to this, so I can't rerun. So I told the contributor, I said, okay, just refresh the commit and push it again to trigger it again, and it won't trigger. So we're just locked in this state of nothingness. So I'm gonna ping it in about. I was just doing that now, just pinging it in to
which repo?
See if it's Go CID. Pull request. What is this? 112. If you have access, that would be wonderful.
So Dean thinks that he'll have he might be able to start working on updating GoIPFS to GoIPLD Prime in Q1.
Awesome.
And I mentioned that Peter and Eric had looked at that and had put together like a whole graph of where things were going and before everything got moved around in terms of people and priorities. So he may ping y'all about that. And he also wanted better GitHub Actions stuff, and I sent Daniel his way as well. So.
Well, I've already pulled Daniel into some stuff there with the Go CID in particular. I've been pulling Daniel into review Go code, but with Go CID, like the test wouldn't even run on Go 1.15. So just got a pull request into Go CID to update that, just a minor fix. And but at the same time, it'd be nice to just update the test runner. But so that the dependencies of these things are really interesting. So like Go CID is used by IPLD Prime. I don't know if there's any thought of replacing that in the future. I don't know if that's necessary, but this thing seems like it's going to have a longer life. Sorry?
Yes, I may even have active drafts. It's just a terrifying thing to actually launch into because of the high degree of dependency. It's unclear if that would actually be a smooth idea.
We're doing it in the JavaScript one too, and it's going to be super painful. Like, I mean, we're swapping out a type that gets passed around that you don't even import. Like, it's the worst thing to update.
Yeah. It's,
now add up.
It's going to be scary in Go too, because I know we've already had conversations in the Go IPFS implementation details where it's used as map keys in some of the internals as well. And so like how it interacts with even garbage collection and things like this is actually pretty, whether pointer quality works, also relevant. It's hairy. It's very hairy.
And then we've got those questions about that Daniel was raising about codecs and having constants for some of these codecs. Currently, they're split between, like we've got codecs in Go CID and hash constants in, I think it's Go multi-hash. It sort of makes sense, but yeah, there's room for revisiting some of these things. But I don't see a way to properly deprecate most of these things anyway. Like even now, Go Merkle-DAG is used by Go IPLD Prime Proto to do its protobufs for Filecoin. Go Merkle-DAG is one of the most ancient parts of this, I think, and yet it's still a critical path for active work. And while I have a new Go DAG PB stuff that could potentially replace that, it's one of these very sensitive, ancient structures that you sort of don't just want to trivially swap out with some new code. So, and Go IPLD format and Go IPLD Seaboard, these things they show up everywhere. Every time IPLD is touched in Go, these things are pulled in for creating blocks. They're in every test fixture. Like the car library that leans on these, Go car leans on all of these things really deeply. So they're not going away. but they need to be cared for in a way that doesn't make them look like they're abandonware. And so that's my main concern here. So I think where we're at is just an agreement that the IPLD team, and I'm willing to put my hand up for this as the primary person because I know Eric doesn't want to, and Daniel I hope will participate as well. We'll take some role in just making them at least look like they're not abandonware. So if people are putting pull requests in and issues, then at least we'll show up. And we've been taking a similar role, a similar tack with multi-formats at the moment. We've been a little bit active in multi-formats, but mostly it's just making sure this thing doesn't look like it's dead. So there's that. Now, yesterday I wrote up I did a brain dump of my stack, my mental stack of where I'm at and what I'm doing, because I feel like I keep on showing up and doing these things that look random, but it's not random. There is actually a method to my madness of what I'm doing, and it still all does go back to this whole test fixture plan. So I'll just quickly give you my stack, my mental stack, and I literally have this in my head. There's a stack, and I'm sort of trying to unwind it, but then I sort of go down again, and then I find something else that sort of lies in there. Okay, so the test fixture thing, one of the top line items is car files, and car files are not absolutely essential for getting this stuff done. It's just that car files are a really nice part of it because they allow you to bundle your fixtures, but also bundle additional data that might contribute to your test running. So if you've got a setup environment, you need to start from a particular state, you can just put them all in a car file. So car files are like this nice enclosure for having this thing running. So I just wanted to get car files running, but the JavaScript car file library was pinned onto this JavaScript stack that Michael's initial rewrite of the stack, and that has now been blown away with Ghazala and Michael's new stuff. And so it's like there's a rewrite needed. But at the same time, the whole interface has just been garbage. I tried to use the Datastore interface that all the old JavaScript stuff was using, and it's just such a terrible fit, and everything feels clunky, and it makes the internals clunky. So at the same time, I was working with Ghazala this is still an active project, this again is in my stack, of designing new interfaces to generic block storage, and sort of working on this space of where you put blocks and how you want to interact with them. The car library is a useful first case for that, but the same sort of interfaces would be rolled out to other block storage mechanisms. So trying to get that right, and we have a pretty good plan, and I've implemented most of it. In that process, that all of my test fixtures for the car library, they sort of mirror what's going on in the Go car library, and they pull in all these codecs to do just to try out different codecs. And DAGPB has been the standout problem in that, because DAGPB has not been updated to any of the new stack in JavaScript. It's like we have been using this ancient DAGPB stuff that nobody's wanted to touch. So I decided to touch that, which is how I ended up in DAGPB, which is how I discovered that it was a much bigger rabbit hole than I thought it was in the beginning, which resulted in all the spec changes for DAGPB and the strictness stuff. And then eventually a rewrite all the way down to the encoding and decoding. And we now have a new DAGPB JavaScript codec that we can use. And then while I'm at that, I've been doing the Go side as well, because it's one of those things where it's in your head and I'm going to lose it if I don't work on it. So that's why I've been working on the Go DAGPB stuff, not because it's critical path, but simply because I'm in there, and it'd be nice to have that done. And also looking at Go IPLD Prime Proto, which has quickly become critical path for Filecoin, still using the old DAGPB stuff in Go, which has all of these strictness problems, which has all of these ways that you can, there's almost infinite ways you can do same data, different CID for DAGPB. So it'd just be really nice to sort that out. So that's one of the reasons I'm on DAGPB. And then at the same time, it's this, while I'm there trying my hand at Go IPLD Prime Codecs, that stuff's not super critical, but it's sort of part of that stack. And I'm trying to unwind that. The other thing is I need DAG.json to work for this stuff. And I've just assumed that DAG.json is good, ready to use, which is of course naive. Of course, now I know that it's naive. Because I want to be able to author these things in DAG.json, and I also would really like to be able to have simplified versions of these things that are just DAG.json. Like you can dump in DAG.json into a test file, and you can copy and paste DAG.json. And what would be really nice is also a loose form of DAG.json. And I've been throwing around the idea of a DAG.json pretty, which is the pretty printed DAG.json that actually would look nice in tests. But it's a agreed codec that works across our different stacks that is fairly easy to implement in theory. So it turns out that it's not at all straightforward. So this is another reason to be in the codec layer of Go. So what I've learned is the Go DAG.json doesn't yet support bytes, which is kind of critical for this stuff. Eric did actually start work on this, and that resulted in some spec questions. The two big spec questions, one of which I'd like to be able to resolve today, is about this tokenization thing about you've got to get deep into the maps in order to determine whether or not you're dealing with bytes. And when you find that you're not dealing with it because you've got some extraneous property or something's not quite right, do you have to reuse all of those tokens, or can you reject the block at that point because it's not properly formed? In the JavaScript, we effectively rewind and reuse and say, oh, that's not bytes, but I'll interpret that as just data model map in map. In Go, it's more complicated because you're dealing with tokenization, and Eric's been buffering, I think it's 6 tokens. And it's a matter of what you do with those 6 tokens when you find at the 6th element that it's not right. Do you have to then unwind and then reuse them properly? Or do you get to say, nah, that's garbage, reject? That's an interesting question that needs resolving. I don't really want to resolve that today because it's complicated. What I would like to resolve is this other question of multi-base and base 64. So Eric's initial implementation was just doing base 64 encoding. The JavaScript implementation does base 64 with a multi-base prefix. And the discussion we've been having on the specs repo is, why do we have a multi-base prefix in there? And I'd like to propose that we don't have a multi-base prefix, that we just do base 64 and ditch multi-base, because there's no good reason for it unless we think we're going to add different bases in there, which then blows away the whole same data, same codec for same data thing. Like, we can't vary the base. It just has to be base 64.
Yeah, that discussion actually is on GitHub that happened. That didn't happen somewhere else. So you should be able to find that thread. I honestly don't think that we discussed it that much. We spent most of the time discussing what the multi-base should be for CID, and it was just sort of like, oh yeah, we'll do multi-base 64. I don't remember why we felt it was important to do the prefix in there, but that was actually a change that was made.
Yeah, like I think I did the change, if I recall correctly. So I was in favor of using multi-base, but yeah, I don't think it's a good idea anymore. So I also can't recall why, but I basically, I guess I thought, well, why not using multi-base for it? But I think, yeah, the argument that I think multi-base really makes sense if you want to use different multi-bases, obviously. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we explicitly don't want to. Like, it's exactly the point that you don't want to see any other multi-base there. So the prefix just doesn't make sense. So I agree with just use base 64 encoding and without the prefix.
Okay. I would like to propose that we go ahead and make that change to the DAG.json spec. I don't know what this impacts, because is anything actually using DAG.json for anything serious, or are we just treating it as a toy everywhere? Yeah, so it's not.
You're going to find out what is using it the moment you publish this.
Yeah.
There definitely is something there that's critically depends on it, but you will never know until you
this is how Go works now, so it won't break any of the Go stuff.
I think it might break the Rust Filecoin test stuff, but I will check up with Austin to make sure it like I'm happy to provide a PR fixing this, so it's like it's not a big deal. Like, it's
And the other thing that's not in my list there is this white space handling in Go that needs to be cleaned up as well. So just basically we need Go work here. So my proposal is that we get these things sorted out. So the multi-base thing, let's do that in the specs repo. The tokenization thing, I'd like to maybe to do some more exploration on that. And my suggestion is, Daniel, because you're relying on me to get a lot of this stuff done, maybe something that you could shift to is helping me get Go DAG JSON up to spec, and because your expertise is also in JSON, so this seems like it's perfect for you. Get that up to spec, and so that we can we have an implementation that we know is one-to-one between the languages, and then we can use this as because one of the things I'd like to do with these test fixtures is also test our codecs with them. And if we have no codec, like none of our codecs agree. DAG PB is the closest codec that agrees between our languages right now, but nothing else agrees. And so we need to sort this stuff out. So that's my suggestion.
If you fix the white space stuff, then I think that also ends up fixing your tokenization problem, because then you can just treat the entire prefix before it as the token, right? So it's not, so if you see an open bracket, you just check if the rest of it is open bracket / blah, 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 base 64. And then that just that whole section of bytes just becomes the entire token for saying what is base 64.
Yeah, it's not quite that simple, because there's a stack of interconnected pieces here where you've got to reach down to do a peek. But my suggestion is that this might be something that Daniel can look at. The complication of doing that kind of peek, because yeah, that's a nice solution, but we've got layering concerns here where these tokens are being embedded from refund right down deep, and so to do a peek, you need to go right down into the stack. And this sort of overriding this layering, which is complicated. So this might be something for Daniel to look at. Maybe unwinding them is not going to be hard. It just requires a little bit of a refactor. But I don't think Eric really wants to be touching this. I think Eric, you threw that branch up in Rage and just moved on, didn't you? So yes, there's a Rage branch that this is found in that maybe Daniel can have a look at.
It's just frustrating to work on something this much when we're like, and still don't use it. Like at the end of the day, we're like, and still please don't really use this for things, because it's still, even if it worked really well, it would be really bad.
I actually can see a lot of places where I would really want to use it, and it's things like test fixtures, debugging, and printing stuff out to the console. It serves really well as a thing that we can look at and understand. Now, the bytes and the CIDs are a problem, but it's at least something. So, yeah. Anyway, that's me. Thanks for bearing with me.
Thanks. And next one is Peter.
Yes, I have stuff to say. Rad, by the way, I love how your short week, I was busy with the kids, turns into, like
involved weekend work as well.
I know. Yeah. So just a comment before I dive into my stuff. The reason me and Tarek didn't get anywhere with IPLD Prime and IPFS is not because other stuff came up. It's because it's like really tricky to move anything anywhere, exactly because of what you were describing, that everything is depending on everything, and all of that is super gnarly, and so on and so forth. So on that note, what I worked IPLD-ish on this weekend, actually, because during the week I don't have time for that, is to get an actual Lotus on an actual testnet running against an actual SQL database, SQLite in this case. So I literally have something that syncs, keeps the chain, does everything correctly, stops, starts, exports, and so on and so forth. This is essentially my gateway to give you guys a chain, because nothing else scales to what we need. The Sentinel team is having the very same problems, and hopefully actually some of this work will be useful. We're already adapting some of it. The problem is this. even the very recent state of basically finality, which is 900 blocks, turns into 17 million blocks just for basically about 7 hours of state. The entire chain I haven't imported anywhere yet, but it's going to be an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude more than that, which means that stuff like the S3 data store is out. You just cannot, talk with S3 that quickly. Additionally, between the chain store block store and the actual Badger data store underneath, there are 3 block store wrappers on top of 4 data store wrappers that all wrap each other with different pieces. So I basically went, Michael, it gets so much better. So I went like, okay, I just need a block store here. That's all I need. And I literally need my blocks. So how hard can it be? It's 5 methods to implement this interface. So the first method is list every single block that you have. No pagination, no limits, nothing. And this is something that needs to run on every startup of Lotus, regardless of how big the chain is. So that's number 1. That was a little bit difficult to figure out with transactions and stuff like that and locking, but that now works. It's super slow still, and I'll have to bring it up with Lotus after we launch, like how we stop scanning the entire thing. But it gets better.
Hold on, did you say there's 700 million blocks?
Yes.
Yes.
So they load 700 million block IDs synchronously?
Yeah.
No, it's a channel.
It's a channel. It's a channel. No. It's a channel. But until this channel is exhausted, your API does not come up.
Okay, so it doesn't consume memory for 700 million blocks, though.
No,
it can stream them. It can stream them.
Okay.
Well, that's very reasonable then.
No, it's not reasonable, but it's not like it's not as bad as it could be.
Yes, it could be worse. Everything can be worse. That's true. Well, I'm just getting started. So, okay, you stream them in, you do stuff with them, and I'll get back to this method in a moment. So then it took me like almost 6 hours to figure out like why my stuff doesn't work, because it's just a block store. You just have a column for the key and a column for the data, and nothing works. It turns out, if you recall, I mentioned that there is like a bunch of layers, and the bottom layer, well, one of the bottom layers is the Ipfs Datastore. If you remember, there was way back a conversation about like, well, we're not going to be using CIDs, we're going to use multi-hashes to look up stuff. Filecoin expects in one of its block stores to find the same block, to put it as a CBOR and get it out as raw, or vice versa. So if you write a block store that is CID aware, nothing works. You have to write your block store to be multi-hash aware, because our reads and our writes use a different key and all them on the multi-hash matches. Now, this thing that I was talking about that streams stuff out, it actually doesn't have, like the normal block store doesn't even have this codec information. So you stream out CIDs by just slapping like raw on all of them, regardless of how they came in into the block store originally. So this lists everything, lists raw CIDs, but when you store and when you retrieve, you might be getting CBOR, you might not. So there is some comment in the links that I left about this as well. Now, there is another problem. Hold up. What was the third thing? Right. So I already covered this. The last thing is that the store is basically not exactly transactional, that you call put all of this, but while it is being put, you actually expect dirty reads to work. If you use a real transaction, nothing works again, because parts of Filecoin or parts of Lotus will not see the parts that it just wrote in the box. So all that to say, yeah, we essentially have a chain that is absolutely dependent on multi-hash comparison right now, and I'm not even sure if we'll be able to unwind this correctly. But that's my exploration report.
Okay, so in order to fix that, then every storage interface has to basically cache the pending puts for any gets until the transaction is complete, so that it can service those without actually talking to the data store.
Well, that, or if you use something like SQL, you just turn on phantom reads. And again, it might be something SQLite specific that my locking wasn't correct, because it's like really difficult to get it even to run. But the moment I turned on, like, just do phantom reads, it was happy after that.
Okay.
Yeah. And
is
yeah,
this also having to do with the thing about batches being done as transactions in a way that they don't need to be? This was on Badger. It seems like a thing they're trying to deal with performance stuff on in that.
Yeah. So batches in Badger are not transactions. Batches in Badger are basically, please don't fsync for these 100 blocks, but
they have been being implemented as transactions at some layer.
Yeah.
That we're trying to get rid of now.
Yep.
Badger seems like bad.
Yes. that's a very accurate summary.
Like, I don't.
But it was new and shiny for a while, so.
I just don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like it does the things that you would want a database at that layer to do. I don't know. Yeah.
And the best part. Yeah, the best part is that Lotus, still has some memory issues here and there. So whenever you a Lotus, you kill 9 of Badger, which means that you have about 20% chance that you destroy it. And yeah, we have a number of people on Falcon Slack where we basically say, okay, so you go to this directory, you delete this stuff, you sync your chain from here again. That's normal operation of Lotus.
These are just all problems that we fixed a long time ago. Like these are gone in so many libraries, like in LevelDB and SQLite, and like everything that operates at this level. Like we solved this in the transaction architecture. I don't know how we went this far backwards so quickly. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But whatever.
No CGO, Michael. No CGO. CGO is civil. Rust is fine, but CGO is civil.
Okay, so we're working around the C bindings in the language. Okay.
Except we still have to have them, right?
Well, because a quick BLS for the BLS library that builds only on a recent Intel or on AMD, you can't even build it on a MacBook still without special flags. That stuff is fine.
Someone done LevelDB in Rust?
That's my opinion.
So Peter, I guess relating to that, I don't know if you've looked at the car block store interface that I hacked together to directly use the car as a read-only block store and put an index at the end of it. I did a little bit more on that last weekend. I have a B-tree based index as well as just using a dumb map. If I have a sorted list of all the SIDs to their byte offsets in the car file as the index that I use, the index is actually a little bit bigger, which I wasn't expecting compared to just using Go's basic map type of mapping SIDs to index. And maybe that's because it compresses it or something. I don't know. But lookups seem similar speed, maybe a little faster, arguably, on the B-tree lookups. So maybe that's better.
Awesome.
You can do either. So I mean, I don't know if you're expecting to be passing around, like if you prefer SQLite as the snapshot things. It feels like having multiple things using the SQLite or SQL is going to be even more dangerous and broken and painful.
So my use case is actually a little bit different because I need to have something that continuously updates stuff correctly without shutting anything down. And that's basically where in the final version of this, there will be a Postgres that is being run against which a Lotus runs, and then other things read into that view as many times as they want. And basically, I can even spin up this mock
so like snapshot
Lotus.
views, or?
Well, they're not exactly snapshots because this store just keeps growing as the Lotus runs.
are the other lotuses and thing like, I mean, you can't run another lotus against it, right? Because then the other lotus will get very confused, no?
You can via this stuff without turning on the actual daemon, without turning the networking that I just linked, where you basically just create
The offline mode?
a state. Yeah. Yeah. It totally runs against the read-only database. I have tried this multiple times.
Okay. Or maybe
It doesn't
the
try
only
to write.
one, right? Like, has anyone else tried? Like,
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of stuff in this direction actually. Like for reads,
I saw that.
parsing the
So
chain.
I was delving into this, and I saw that there were basic places where you could have a read-only repo, and then there was just really nothing using that anywhere. So someone had thought about it, but there really wasn't much proof of this being a viable solution. But if you've gotten it to start up and be happy with that, that's awesome. The other thing that we were talking about very briefly when we were considering our options last week on Sentinel was, could we just run Lotus on like a ZFS or some sort of file system with snapshots and then use the file system snapshot mechanism to save, you know, a consistent snapshot and use that as a read-only view of the Badger or whatever data store while the Lotus keeps going. I think that's probably potentially a path of really not too bad resistance, but it does mean everything's on the same node.
For everybody else on the call, why this is important actually, there's another thing in Lotus where whenever you make an API call, there is literally a global lock, it freezes everything else. So if you hit the API too much, you lose sync with the chain because it cannot catch up. So that's another thing that the Sentinel folks are working against, and which I'm also working against for the slingshot competition, because I need a view that also hits the API relatively quickly, but I need to like produce it some other way without losing sync. So that all basically came together in this, like, I'm just going to make it on SQL, and yeah.
Yeah, we only have 5 minutes left, and there was a question from Johnny about which deterministic mapping order we use for the XCBOR.
Yeah, we talked about this last week and just touched about that there are many, and a lot of people just cut and paste. But so I'm actually finalizing the spec and as a pull request for the CBOR and representation of the DID document. And I want to make sure it's aligned with what the deterministic ordering that is already existing in IPLD.
Yes. So the problem is that we currently use the ordering that the current the XCBOR spec proposes with the first I can't recall. I think first the length and then the rest.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like we tend to like, I would like to change it. So we haven't discussed it yet, but I totally would want to do the normal, like what everyone does, like basically just mem compare sort order basically. So I'm not sure if it's a good idea to put in there the current order that we use, because I for myself would like to change it. I don't know what others think about the CBOR map key order.
Well, and is the spec itself changing? Like I know you pasted a change, but is like the canonical CBOR moving to the other one as well? Because I think the one that we picked was because it was the canonical one.
Well, I think canonical is, like we talked about last week, is up to the implementers of what you mean by canonical. And as long as you specify it in your spec, then it's canonical as you determined it. So I'm writing the spec, and so they want to close it within the next week or so to actually get the candidate recommendation. So I want to make sure that I'm not shooting myself in the foot, and that it's totally in line. So I have to do minimal processing to get IPLD in conformant with what I just wrote. And I pulled it out of the air as far as what I copied and pasted from the 749. And of course, the draft version, they're not accepting it because it's not normative. So, but I can specify whatever I want. I want to make sure that it's like, if we are moving towards a different representation, that actually and we're pretty confident about that I get it in the spec now.
My hot takes on this right now, not having have rediscussed the question with anybody recently, so like disclaimed. I would go ahead and use the canonical sorting that is defined by the CBOR spec right now, even though almost none of us in this call, me included, like it very much. I would stick with it. That's what we originally specified DAG's CBOR to be.
Yeah,
In the long
I feel like
run,
we're stuck with it.
Hmm?
I feel like we're stuck with it at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a we're stuck with it thing. So you might as well keep with it. I'm thinking most of the properties that show up in this DID spec are known in advance anyway, right? So it's also, we're not sorting anybody's random string keys here, are we?
Well, not yet. Right now, I'm using UTF-8 keys, UTF-8 strings as keys, full stop. Which case but there is a movement towards something called CBOR LD, CBOR linked data, where you use an external dictionary and you order that based on that ordering of the dictionary. In which case, you can use ints as keys. So that's I put a placeholder in the spec for how to use tags to do this in the CBOR, but like most of it is to get to that COSE signed thing that we talked about before, which is that basically I have a CID and that CID is raw CBOR or a payload that basically is signed with as the payload prepended with tag 42. So it's just with trying to get this to candidate recommendation, and I'm the only one who's working on the CBOR stuff. And I think it mentioned Jim Shad died just last week, and he was going to help me with some of this, making sure that he reviewed it. He's the CBOR expert.
No, I think you're on the right track. Go with the UTF-8 string keys like you're doing. Sounds good to me. That is the thing that we are the most confident will be the least trouble for any of our existing code to work with, and should be the case forever. And I would stick with the sorting algorithm that is specified by that original CBOR RFC. Even if it makes us sad, we have already committed to it in the past. Ship sailed. It's fine. Right. We're going to live with it.
And one thing I would recommend is take a look at the CDDL, the Concise Data Dictionary Language or Data Definition Language. I've been using it, and I've for making that as being the abstract data model to actually get to lossless conversion between JSON and CBOR. So I've been writing a lot of it now, and actually it makes sense. Where actually you can have it optional prepended with a tag, although DAG CBOR doesn't use the tags other than 42. And so I've took the time to learn it, and actually it's pretty robust. And in fact, a lot of IETF full specifications are moving towards CDDL, including if you guys remember, Jim Pick and the woman from Google presented the SXG signed HTTP payloads, and she wrote all of that in CDDL, which is pretty cool.
All right, we are hitting the 1 hour mark. So I posted in the chat the link to the CBOR spec where we specified a sort order. So yeah,
all right, awesome.
I actually wasn't aware of that. We so clearly specify it. That's cool. So is there anything else? But I don't want to run over, but if there's anything urgent, then no, it doesn't seem so. Then thanks everyone, and see you all next week. Goodbye, everyone.